Welcome to this explainer on what we're calling the shift. Today we're doing a completely impartial, data-driven breakdown of the massive multi-front competition between the United States and China as of August 2026. If you follow global geopolitics even a little bit, you know things are moving incredibly fast right now. But today, we're throwing all the political rhetoric out the window. We are just going to look strictly at the hard data.
So let's jump right in. We're going to explore 6 specific battlefields today, and just let the numbers speak for themselves. We're covering artificial intelligence, energy and electricity, robotics, military power, the strategic situation in Iran, and finally, the US national debt trap.
All right, Section 1, Artificial Intelligence. And as the subtitle says, the gap has collapsed. The data here shows a massive spending disparity that, honestly, just isn't giving the results you might expect.
Just look at this disparity. The US is outspending China by an astonishing 23 times on private AI investment. We're talking almost $286 billion compared to China's $12.4 billion. Now, you would naturally think that kind of financial dominance would guarantee a permanent, insurmountable lead, right?
Well, actually, let's look at how this builds over time. Back in 2023, the US enjoyed a very comfortable 31.6% performance lead across major AI benchmarks. But that advantage has literally been in free fall. It dropped to 14.2%, then down to 8.1%, and now the performance gap between the top US and Chinese AI models has practically vanished. By early 2026, it's sitting at just 2.7%.
And it gets wilder. China isn't just catching up in performance. They are quietly locking down the intellectual property for tomorrow. The research shows they now account for almost 70% of global AI patent filings. They are absolutely dominating the foundational research landscape right now.
Okay, moving right along to Section 2, Energy and Electricity, or the world's power plant. Because, let's face it, to power all that AI, you need vast amounts of electricity. Let's look at the physical infrastructure here.
So, China is still the top global electricity consumer, for sure. But their grid is transforming way faster than most people realize. Clean energy now makes up a massive 42% of their total mix. You know that old narrative that they rely entirely on legacy fossil fuels? It's shifting. In fact, coal generation is actually declining there for the first time since 2015. The scale of their renewable rollout is just staggering. They've hit 600 million kilowatts in wind capacity alone. But here is the absolute critical takeaway for us. They're capturing 72% of the global market for new wind turbines. Think about that. They aren't just greening their own grid, they are literally manufacturing the infrastructure for the rest of the world. And all that cheap, abundant energy feeds directly into automation. That brings us to Section 3, Robotics, the factory of the humanoid, where China is aggressively morphing into the world's primary robotics hub.
The contrast on this one is incredibly stark. In 2025, China installed 276,000 industrial robots. That's more than the US, Japan, Germany, and South Korea put together. For context, the US figure sits at just 35,000. China is deploying robots at a pace that is fundamentally rewriting global manufacturing math.
But the real game changer is their grip on tomorrow's tech. We're not just talking about standard industrial arms anymore. Chinese firms shipped roughly 80% of all humanoid robots globally in 2025. This means the automated workforce of the future, it's overwhelmingly being built and bought inside China.
Now, all this massive industrial and technological base inevitably translates to hard power. Let's look at Section 4, Military Power, Capacity, and Modernization, pulled directly from the Pentagon's own 2025 data.
According to the Defense Department, China operates over 370 naval ships, compared to America's 296. But it's the underlying industrial data that should really grab your attention. This fleet is backed by a shipbuilding capacity of roughly 20 million tons a year. The US, roughly 100,000 tons. That means China's capacity to build or replace naval vessels is roughly 200 times larger than America's.
And the data tracks this rapid accumulation across the board. We're seeing over 600 fourth and fifth generation fighters, a growing nuclear stockpile that's crossed 600 operational warheads, and fully deployed hypersonic glide vehicles like the DF-17 and DF-27.
So this shifting balance of power, it's already having real-world diplomatic consequences. Let's dive into Section 5, the strategic situation in Iran and the resulting diplomatic realignment.
Following that massive $400 billion strategic partnership they signed back in 2021, the timeline highlights a massive pivot point. After the early 2026 U.S. military campaign in Iran, it was China who stepped in as the primary mediator to broker a ceasefire. This is a region that has historically been a traditional U.S. sphere of influence, and Beijing just walked in as the defining diplomatic power.
But here's what you really need to take away from this. The geopolitical consequence is huge. Iranian oil is now being traded in Chinese yuan, totally bypassing the US dollar. By using their diplomatic weight, China is literally rewriting the financial rules for global energy trading outside of the traditional US petrodollar system. While all these massive global shifts are happening, our final section requires us to look inward. Let's examine Section 6, the US national debt trap, the financial front.
The numbers here are, frankly, staggering. According to 2026 Treasury data, the U.S. national debt has hit $36.2 trillion. That represents a debt-to-GDP ratio of 123%. Simply put, the U.S. now owes significantly more than its entire economy produces in a single year.
If you want to understand the true severity of this trap, consider this detail. The $892 billion the U.S. is spending every single year just on debt interest now exceeds the entire U.S. defense budget. Let that sink in for a second. The cost of just servicing past debt is a bigger burden on the federal budget than funding all those military capabilities we were just talking about.
Meanwhile, the data shows China has been strategically, quietly, reducing its holdings of U.S. Treasury securities. They're down 40% from their 2013 peak, sitting at around $780 billion now. They are systematically diversifying away from U.S. paper and pouring into gold and yuan assets instead.
Summarizing the economic reality across all these different fronts we've looked at today, the structural momentum is undeniably clear. China now accounts for nearly 29% of global manufacturing, compared to America's 16.8%. They are combining a massive manufacturing base with a serious lead in industrial robotics and incredibly fast electrical grid deployment. So based on the sheer volume of data we just covered across these 6 battlefields, it really leaves us with one incredibly provocative question. In this rapidly shifting landscape, can America still compete? I mean, in a world where the AI gap is practically gone, industrial capacity is heavily skewed, and national debt limits your strategic flexibility, it's a question the data absolutely demands we ask. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep analyzing the data, and we'll see you on the next one.